In this episode, we talk about building an API for many different devices, when to build native apps, and how to automatically pull metadata from various sources. Actually, we talk about more than that, but you'll see. Hi, and welcome to the Scale Your Code podcast. My name is Christoph Limpelaer, and I'm the host of the show. You may know me by now. We've got about 22 episodes, and this is the second episode of 2016. I want to wish you all a very happy new year. I hope you had a fantastic 2015 and that you're ready to get some work done in 2016. I'm personally very, very excited about 2016 because I've got a major announcement that I want to tell you about. But first, I want to welcome you, Skylar, and I want to ask you, how's your 2016 going so far? Do you guys have some exciting things going on at Plex for this year? Or do you expect some big improvements or changes?
Yeah, we are super excited in general. Excited just to be here talking to you today, Christoph. 2016, I think, is going to be great for us. I'll get in trouble if I spill the beans on anything, probably. So I'll be doing my best not to. We've got a couple guys who've been doing the CES tour and all that stuff. But yeah, a lot of big stuff in the cards for us, for sure.
See, my job is trying to get that information out of you, but I'll try not to make you spill the beans and get you in trouble. Speaking of spilling the beans, I want to thank my sponsor, linuxacademy.com, for sponsoring this episode, but also for hiring me. That's right, that's the major announcement. Linux Academy just hired me this week. We've been talking about it for a few months and finally finalized it. I'm super excited, and that's why I think that 2016 is going to be an incredible year. For Scale Your Code, 2015 was already fantastic. I'm going to be keeping the show and going to be doing more of that. So the show plus Linux Academy at the same time is super exciting for me. I do want to say that, the reason that I joined Linux Academy is because I truly believe in the way that they teach the content that they teach. And they cover courses on Linux, AWS, DevOps, and OpenStack. But it's not just something you sign up and you pay a monthly fee and you just kind of watch some videos and then go on your merry way. You get to practice on real servers. So you're looking at the content and then you apply it. You're not just memorizing, you're actually applying. And if you want, then you can take that knowledge and go on and get a certification, which makes you more valuable in the workforce, or just in general, it helps you understand more of what's going on. So I just highly recommend it. I wouldn't have joined it if I didn't believe in it fully and really believe in it. So definitely check it out. You can get your discount that's still going on for $22 a month at scaleyourcode.com/Linux Academy. And I look forward to seeing you there because we do have a community. So drop by and say hello. But anyway, Skylar, back to this episode. Getting really excited here, and I'm super excited to have you on the show as well. So thanks a lot for being here. Can you tell us a little bit more about who you are, how you got started with Plex, and what you do there?
Yeah, so I got started with Plex actually because it was started by a few friends of mine who I'd worked with before in the past. So we had previously been doing some, let's just say, less exciting work, a little less consumer focused, more of an enterprise kind of thing. They kind of went off on their own to start this fun media consumer focused product, kind of keeping an eye on what they were doing. And when it became obvious that they really were going to be able to turn this into a real thing, I jumped at the chance to join them. So I've been there coming up on 5 years now, which is hard to believe.
How long did it take before they started getting some of the traction and you jumped on board?
It was probably, in their opinion, I'd say it was a real thing for about a year before I joined. And as a hobby, it goes back, gosh, I don't even know, a couple years before that.
Oh, yeah. So it's not one of those things that, the media writes up about it and it's an overnight success, which doesn't really exist in the first place. So it's always interesting to know how long things like that do take to develop. And sometimes, you'll go for months and nothing happens, then all of a sudden it takes off. So it's really interesting. And what do you do at Plex?
So over the years, we've done a little bit of everything. We started as a really small group. Now that we've grown, my main role is as one of the directors in the engineering organization on mostly cloud things. So we've got a Rails API, servers in the cloud, some DevOps things, and just for good measure, the Roku client, which has always been kind of a little pet project of mine. So shout out to Roku.
I think you were introduced to me as the director of stuff in the cloud or something like that.
That sounds about right.
I'm like, that's the guy I need to talk to. So can you tell us a little bit more about Plex? I know it's a thing for media, but what specifically can people do with it?
Yeah, I think the simplest explanation, and I props here on my shirt, is your media everywhere. So basically, what our goal is to give you one place to kind of organize your media and then empower you to access that anywhere. So I feel like everybody these days has some media on their computer somewhere. You've
Mhm.
got photos, videos, music. So we want to give you one place to kind of organize that, and then you can access it anywhere. Pull it up on that computer, but also pull it up on your phone, on another computer in the house, on the TV, on to work while you're on vacation 3,000 miles away, kind of your media truly everywhere.
So how does that work? Do you have one central location where users upload their videos and sound, music, or whatever it is, or is it stored locally on their computers? How does that work?
Yeah, stored locally is the main model. So you'll download the Plex Media Server on your computer. I use computer sort of loosely there. It could be a laptop, could be an old Mac Mini that you tossed into a closet, could be something like a NAS. Basically anything anything capable of running software can probably run a Plex Media Server. And the reason we chose that model is that that's basically where the media lives. So we're a little different in that regard, I think, to a lot of startups, especially me being the cloud person, to be telling you that the main first thing you need to do is install some software on your computer, because that's where the media lives. So if I've got media at my house, I'm sitting right next to a time capsule right now that's got a
Mhm.
bunch of photos and music on it. So the simplest way is for us to have Plex Media Server running kind of nearby that data and then expose it everywhere.
Well, and that probably saves you quite a bit on cost as well because you don't have to store that on the servers, or maybe you do. I don't know. We'll learn about that in just a moment. But what? So you have a Plex media server, and then you have the clients that connect to the server. So that's the main difference between the two. The client doesn't actually store any of the files, or well, except when it's transferring them. But the server has all the files. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. The clients kind of have gotten smarter and smarter over the years, but the idea is that the clients can be fairly dumb, and that has allowed us to run clients all sorts of places. So iOS, Android, sure, but also things like smart TVs that aren't always as capable as something like a phone or a computer. DLNA clients. Yeah, Xbox, PlayStation, pretty much anything can act as a client in that model because the clients are fairly simple, just consuming the media.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, actually a lot more about how you're able to handle so many different kinds of clients and what approach people should take to if they want to build an app like that, or if they expect a service to live on so many different clients. I'm sure there are some things that or roadblocks you've run into that you hopefully can share with us. But so that sounds great when you have a media server that's really close to you, right? Maybe it's in the same house or right next to you, like you said. But what about if you're in a different country, you're thousands of miles away? How do you still stream quickly? How do you avoid latency issues and things like that?
Yeah, it can be a problem. In the simplest, you are going to be capped by your upstream bandwidth. So if I install Plex Media Server at home and then I go on vacation 3,000 miles away, I can stream. But if my upstream bandwidth is terrible, then it's going to be a limiting factor. There are a few ways around that. You can choose to sync content before you leave, either to your phone or to the cloud. We have a product called Cloud Sync that would basically say, oh, I know I'm going to want to watch that, so I'm going to sync it to the cloud. By the time I get there, that means I can stream it directly from the cloud. And that's using my own personal cloud storage. So whether
I
I've
see.
got Dropbox, Box, Google, Amazon, any of those, I'm sort of choosing to store an optimized copy in the cloud so that I'll be able to stream it without worrying about my upstream.
I actually did have an issue like that because every time I do an interview like this, I really want to get as hands-on with the product or the company as possible. And I'd never used Plex before because I haven't really watched that many movies, or I don't know, I just use different kinds of ways of listening to music and things like that. But my brother does, and he's been talking about it for a while, probably over a year now, and it always piqued my interest. How does this work? This is really cool. And so I installed Plex on my computer, or actually it was in the web browser, and we'll talk more about the differences there. But so you have an app.plex.tv that you can load in a browser, and then you can share your libraries with different people. So he shared his library with me, and I was streaming a movie sometime during the evening. And at first, the quality was great. It was streaming properly, but then it started buffering a lot. So I kept having to gradually lower the quality. So you said a few ways to fix that issue, but are there any other ways that you guys are envisioning that could help with that problem? Because like you said, the upload is usually really capped, and it's kind of small. So how do you work around that?
Yeah, right now is kind of choosing ahead of time to know you're going to want that available externally, and then sort of pre-transcode it that way. Looking forward, we'll continue to investigate ways we can make that better. In the example you gave, you were kind of manually stepping down qualities. It's possible that we can kind of optimize that for you and say, well, instead of you noticing that it buffered and changing, can we do that on the fly? That's something that we'd like to play with. Yeah, it's an area that we are actively looking at.
Right, and we're not going to talk too much about video in this interview, even though it's super interesting. I already have 2 other episodes that you can check out, one with Wistia and one with Netflix, where we cover transcoding and streaming and that sort of thing. So I feel like we already have a good bit of content on that. I want to focus more on different things. But do you ever envision actually moving from this local host to actually uploading on the cloud, your own cloud like that, and then slapping a CDN in between and doing it that way? Does that make sense for you guys, or is that going to be way too expensive?
It's at least interesting enough to think about, I'd say. Sure. Like I said, right now, the most compelling reason not to be in the cloud is that the data's not in the cloud. Mm-hmm. Like most of my media collection is stored at home anyway, so it makes sense for the server to be home. But that's something we're keeping an eye on. I mean, people are increasingly storing media in the cloud. So it's interesting enough to think about, at least.
Sure. Okay, so moving on. When you install it locally, how does that work? Do you set up some kind of, like, you call it a server, but how does that work on installation?
Yeah. Basically, the media server itself is a software package written in C++ that'll run just about anywhere. Mac, Windows, Linux, NAS platforms running on various flavors of ARM, and pretty much anywhere. So you basically just install that and run it.
And then it'll open up a port that you can connect to. How do you secure that, especially if you start sharing your library with different people?
Yeah, so when sharing enters the mix, that's when kind of the cloud starts to become more a piece of the equation. Mm-hmm. So we have a service at Plex.tv. So if you go to just Plex.tv, that'll be kind of our main marketing site with downloads and all that. But it's also where we're hosting the API. So sharing basically works by you install the Plex media server on your computer, and then it goes and talks to Plex.tv and says, hey, I'm a new server, I belong to so-and-so, and here I'm available at this IP address and this port. So that kind of connection information is stored at Plex.tv, even though none of the content is. So now your brother, who's at a different location, different IP address, we store that sharing information at Plex.tv. And then when he connects, he'll talk first to Plex.tv, and it kind of brokers the connection. It'll say, oh, so you've got your own server, which you know about, but you also have this shared server. It's currently at this IP address and this port. So it's kind of brokering those connections and also serving as authentication. So a token-based authentication scheme.
Right, okay. And I actually checked the networks or network connections before this interview, and that's when I could see there was a primary server connecting, and then shortly after that there was something called Titan, and Titan had a different address that it was connecting to, and it was switching from the primary to the Titan. And so I was like, what is Titan? And I asked you, and you're like, well, it's probably the client that you're connecting to. I have no idea what Titan is, but that's probably what it is, which was interesting. I'll have to ask him if that's what he named his could you manually actually name that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So out of the box, we'll try to kind of set some defaults, and depending on the platform, we might be able to ask the OS for kind of a friendly name, but you can always give it a manual name if you want. So I would guess that someone
I
shared
see.
a server named Titan with you.
And so when you go on app.plex.tv and you check the HTML code, you see that there's very, very little code actually on there, but you are loading two different JavaScript files. And then all of a sudden, all this data flows in and all this HTML flows in. I'm assuming that's the API. Can you talk a little bit more about how that works?
Yeah, so app.plex.tv, it has kind of an amusing history, but basically it's just the front end for a single page application, JavaScript application. So the shell of it is really small, really simple, just kind of exists in order to get that authentication token and then pull down the main app, which is the big JavaScript file it pulled down. And then it's kind of off to the races. It's using the API to get a list of servers. And once it gets that list of servers, it'll talk directly to the server and say, hey, it's me. It'll authenticate and, oh, what content do you have in your library? And kind of get that first-class media browsing experience.
What's powering the Rails API? What kind of architecture do you have behind that?
The Rails API, nothing too exciting, to be honest. It's disappointing, but it's kind of evolved over the years. When it was very first created, Plex.tv was called MyPlex back then, and it was mostly just a really simple. Let's see, it was Rails 2 back then, I think. Really simple Rails 2 application to just kind of CRUD of having servers and then choosing to share them. It's grown up a little bit since then, upgraded Rails, but nothing too exciting technology-wise. It's a Rails stack with Unicorn and Sidekick for workers, and what else is interesting? I don't know.
Where are you hosted?
So we've actually, two of our earliest employees came to us from Engine Yard. And so they got us set up on Engine Yard years ago, and we've been happy Engine Yard customers ever since. So it's built on top of Amazon, so it's EC2 instances under the hood, but managed through Engine Yard to give it a little bit kind of simpler management.
Can you think of, or can you even share the kinds of stats that you have running on those, like the number of requests per second or per month or something like that?
The other day I made a point of looking that up so that I would answer because I knew you would ask. I totally forgot.
It happens.
Let's see. I think I've got it. Let me see. Yeah, so like one of the more common endpoints looks like we were getting about 21,000 requests per minute on that endpoint. So that kind of gives you a sense, obviously, times n endpoints, but
cool.
Yeah.
So when I'm trying to think of, you have the JavaScript, you have the Rails API, that's for my desktop or laptop. What about for cell phones or smaller devices like that? Do you build a native application, and does that communicate with the Rails API? How much of it communicates? Things like that.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll work backwards on those. So okay. The applications, the client applications, generally speaking, start by talking to the Rails API. They talk to Plex TV. And that's mostly just to kind of discover what servers are out there. Especially like if it's on my laptop, my IP address might change, my port might change, all these things. So it's kind of step one is talking to Plex TV. But it's mostly just that initial step to get the list of servers and their connection info. From there, the client is usually talking directly to your Plex Media server. So it'll kind of be step one, get a list of servers. Step two, and from this point on, mostly talk directly to the. As for native, the answer is mostly kind of all native and therefore bespoke for each platform. Not a lot of shared code, which I know is something you're curious to talk about either now or later. But yeah, mostly native on those platforms.
Is there a reason why you choose to do that?
Yeah, I think we've actually changed a little bit over the years, but I think for us it was mostly just putting user experience first, kind of wanting a first-class experience. And for us, that usually meant going native and really specific on each of the platforms. We like to say that rather than building kind of one app and having it run on 20 different platforms, it's kind of the same app with the same look and feel. Even if that was a nice Plex look and feel, just wouldn't be that satisfying. Instead, we would rather build possible Plex app on each platform. So when you're on your iPhone, it feels like Plex, but it also feels like an iPhone. So if you went back and forth from the iOS app and the Android app, they're similar and they both feel like Plex, but they also, you would know which one was which, even if you took away the Chrome of the device.
Right.
And they definitely feel platform appropriate. More recently, we have kind of accepted the wisdom of seeing what we can share between those. So, because that argument's mostly about UI more than anything else, frankly. So we have experimented with taking some of the kind of complicated bits and seeing if we can write those as a shared library. And
so now that you've done that and you have that experience under your belt, if somebody was following your footsteps, would you still recommend taking that approach? Is there anything you do differently?
Honestly, I would probably do it the same way for a couple reasons. One is that platforms benefit from that sharing anyway. So if you were just talking about iOS and Android, it's sort of a known art on how you might build a shared library those could both use. But when you start talking about Roku and these smart TV platforms, it's just kind of different languages, harder to share. So that's one reason, is we would kind of knowing that we were only going to be able to share on a subset of the platforms anyway might not have leapt in. And the other one was just that it was hard. Long-term maintenance, it's going to be a big win, but there were some real headaches on building those shared libraries. So if we had tried to do that from day one, I just worry that it would have taken us longer to kind of get a nice app out to market.
Did you have to build different teams to build these different apps, or did you just kind of adapt and learn on the go, or how'd that work?
Yeah, we try to cross-pollinate for a lot of reasons, but at the end of the day, it is kind of a team for each platform for the most part. So we've got an Android team, we've got an iOS team, and they definitely know each other and get along and talk as much as possible. But at the end of the day, it's mostly different people working on those.
One question we get sometimes at Linux Academy is, why should I pay for this when I can just Google for answers or watch YouTube videos that cover similar topics? And that's a great question. The most obvious answer is because our instructors have carefully laid out all the content in order and in the same place so you don't have to look for it. Plus, the content is updated so you're not stuck with outdated information. But that's not the only value you get from it. You also get access to 3 important things. First, the community. We have a community where students and instructors can interact. Stuck on a problem? We'll help. Pass their certification? We'll celebrate with you. This also ties into the second point, which is instructor help. Again, if you're stuck on a problem, you can email support directly and get help. Or again, you could go to the community. The third big one is our hands-on environment. Sure, you can learn by watching a YouTube video and probably forget most of it. Or you can jump in our real servers and practice what you just learned a minute ago. That way, it's fresh on your mind and you'll remember how you did it. We're adding lots of great new courses, which you can access with your unlimited account for only $22 a month. Sign up now at scaleyourcode.com/Linux Academy and drop me a message in the community. I really look forward to seeing you. If you're not sure whether this is for you or not, send me an email at chris@scaleyourcode.com and I'll personally help you figure it out. Go to scaleyourcode.com/Linux Academy and I'll see you soon. It seems like we're really making advancements in trying to bridge that gap between the native feel and the web-based feel, where you have different things like PhoneGap and whatnot, but I don't feel like we're quite there yet. Do you think it's ever going to be really, really close?
I'm a skeptic. I'm rooting for it because I want to live in that world. I want PhoneGap to be this awesome experience that feels native, write it once, run it everywhere. So I love that people are working on that, and I hope that it gets there. In the short term, I think I'm just, I don't know if I'm cynical or skeptical. I'm something.
Right. How much of it is native? So I know that you said a good bit of it is, especially the designing, that sort of thing, but how much of it can you keep on the device? Because every time I've tried to build an application and connect it to a cloud or something like that, you do sometimes kind of feel that latency in between the two. How do you reduce that latency? How do you make it fast?
Um, it's in that sense, I would say it's mostly native, which helps. So I mean, we're certainly getting data over the network via the API, but that is kind of unavoidable for us. So
Can you give
I
an
don't know.
example of what kind of data?
Um, well, so say you're browsing the library, we're mostly returning that as XML. So we just have an XML representation of your, say, photo library with kind of rich metadata as you drill down and kind of going from, trying to, one thing we certainly try to do is tune how much metadata and how big that XML is based on where you are in the browsing hierarchy. So you'd kind of have two options where one would be send everything right off the bat so that future browsing is really fast, but that initial load is painfully slow. So I think we've kind of erred on the side of try to make that initial request small and give to kind of render that step of the UI, kind of I don't know, a level of detail approach.
How much of it can you actually cache?
We probably more than we actually do. I think we've been nervous about caching too much, just as a lot of the library stuff won't change, but just enough does. Things like view states, if I watch it on some other client and then I'm pulling it up here and I want to see the next unwatched episode, refetching that list fresh, then I might get some stale data there. So we do cache some, but I think we have erred on the side of I don't know, caution.
And you cache that natively.
Yeah.
What about for the web browsers? What kind of caching do you use there?
When they're talking to the Plex media server, then same answer, not a lot of caching. For the actual application itself, we'll try to let the browser cache that. Yeah.
I'm not sure how much of this you've actually worked on, so let me know if you can't really answer this, but when you look at this kind of UI, especially the streaming, but more specifically Plex, it seems kind of like not complex in a bad way. It looks really nice, right? And it's kind of, you can tell there's a lot of design going into it, the animations and that sort of thing. But a lot of times when you go on websites, the animations really slow down the experience. I didn't experience that with Plex at all. Can you give some tips on what you guys have been able to do to reduce that jittery lag or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah.
Jank, I think they call it.
Yeah. I don't know that I have any, I didn't work on it enough to give kind of good tips or answers, but it is something that we care a lot about. So I'm glad that it seems like we might be winning.
I'll have to see. I know you guys have a blog, and I've been trying to read through some of those. Do you have an engineering blog, by the way?
We don't actually. The main blog is written by our founder, CTO, main engineer, kind of all of the above. So it is occasionally technical, but we don't yet have kind of a dedicated engineering blog. It'd be nice to.
I really like the way that he writes. If you get the chance to tell him he's a really good writer. He's funny, and it's hard to write these kinds of things in a funny light and make them enjoyable to read, especially when it's more technical kind of stuff. I know from experience. So, good job on that for sure.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to actually, I had one more question I skipped over. Looking at my notes here is when we were talking about connections and switching from the primary to the other server, I also noticed that some of these connections were through WebSocket.
Yeah.
What is WebSocket, first of all?
Have kind of the family of HTML5 technologies, and they basically allow an app running inside the browser to keep a connection open to some other resource. Part of JavaScript Sandbox, it can't do something like open a TCP socket the way that kind of native code could. So we mostly use it as an alternative to polling in order to stay fresh with data. So one simple example maybe is when you add a new library. within your Plex media server. So you're inside the web client kind of managing your media server, and you say, oh, I've got some videos in this folder. And the media server goes off and is scanning all these things in and finding metadata and doing all this work, rather than the web client continuing to make polling requests every second or every n milliseconds. It's able to just have one WebSocket open to the media server and it updates to it. So it allows the web client to have a much snappier interface, kind of get those updates in a push way rather than having to pull.
What do you think would be some other use cases for something like WebSocket?
That's my favorite one, is that kind of that push rather than pull approach. I think the canonical example is probably chat programs. If you were to go on some sort of WebSocket tutorial page, I'm sure they would have you writing a little chat client.
And that's something you can just go in your web server, and I think you guys use Nginx, and go in there and configure it to have that.
Yeah, for the media server, it was actually a bit of an adventure because the media server doesn't use Nginx. In the cloud, we do. But in the media server, it's all kind of bespoke, built on top of Boost libraries. It didn't end up being too hard, but it was probably harder than who just finds a library and drops it in.
Right. It's never that easy, especially when it's you implementing them. You hear about all these, you're going to start implementing something and you're like, oh, this is going to take just, few minutes, maybe an hour or so.
Yep.
You start implementing it, you're like, of course I've got a completely different use case. Of course I do.
Totally.
All right. So I am kind of curious about the transcribing and how it works, especially since all of this seems to be happening locally. Can you give us a little bit of detail of how the transcribing works?
Yeah, so for the transcoding, we use an open source library, FFmpeg, which is just an awesome open source library for any sort of media processing, especially video. So basically, the Plex media server comes with our kind of variants of FFmpeg to do that on-the-fly real-time transcoding. So it's especially interesting to us because of the variety of platforms. So I might have something fairly innocuous, some video format on my machine, but if I'm trying to stream it to iOS, Android, Roku, Vizio Smart TV, and Xbox, and all these things, they all have little tweaks on what they can and can't handle. So MP4s are fairly safe, but some of them are optimized for streaming, some of them aren't. MKVs are like pretty well supported, but not quite as well. WMV files are pretty Microsoft specific these days. So that transcoder kind of gives us the ability to make sure that our users don't have to worry about that. I think anyone who's forced to understand all those formats, I just don't wish that upon anybody. So we really want to be able to say, like, you have a video file, I don't care what format it is, just drop it into Plex, and we'll worry about what needs to happen for that to be consumed on all of your. And if that means transcoding to HLS, so be it. Transcoding to live MKV, no problem. Smooth streaming, fine.
That sounds like another tough challenge, because if you were storing all these videos on your own server, then you could have machines that are specifically optimized for transcoding. I want to make sure I wasn't saying transcribing again. But here you're doing it locally on these people's machines. You don't know what kind of CPU they have. They may have really slow machines. How does that work? Is that a problem?
It's, I think, a blessing and a curse. I don't know what the percentage of those two things are. I have certainly read with a little bit of jealousy some of the other engineering blogs. I think Dropbox had a famous one where they talked about how they pre-transcode the first few seconds of every video on Dropbox, and then as you play it, they go, oh, we better do the rest. That's a lot harder without kind of knowing that you have infinite computing resources on the media server. So there's no real trick that we've employed to it, I wouldn't say. It's something we kind of constantly think about ways to improve. The main thing is just being aware of the kind of the power of the computer. So if you're running on an ARM-based NAS, we'll just say, you know what, you can't transcode will let you remux. So again, this is one of those things that I don't wish upon anyone to understand, but remuxing basically means that you kind of unpackage the container of the video, but the actual video stream you would just copy as is. So if you had an MKV file with H.264 video in it, but the client needed an HLS container, you could remux that H.264 video from the MKV to HLS.
I see.
So that's something that might be easy enough to do, regardless of the processor. Mm-hmm. But actually converting that video is another story. And as we get into things like 4K and H.265, mm-hmm. that's even more intensive. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely a challenge, something we constantly look into ways to do better.
And I could see it taking a little while too to go ahead and transcode in all those different formats and different resolutions and that sort of thing. Is it all across the board? It really depends on what kind of machine is there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and the other challenge is just that even if we chose to pre-transcode, because it's not our servers, it's your media server. On the plus side, it means that we're not paying for the storage, so that's good for our bottom line, I guess. But the downside is that we're kind of mindful of wasting that storage. Yeah. So if you've got a spare hard drive, if we were to pre-transcode every single file, your usable space on that hard drive would shrink to 20% or something like that.
Yeah.
So we have to be a little kind of mindful, respectful. So one of our recent features that we launched last year was called Media Optimizer, which basically lets you choose whether you want to pre-transcode maybe a subset of things and at what quality. So one example is maybe you would most recently added home videos. So maybe I'm thinking, I'm going to share home videos with my family, and I want to be able to watch any home video, but they're probably mostly going to watch the recent ones. Like it's going to be more unusual that they go back and watch the ones from years ago. So that's kind of a roundabout solution to this problem where we say, okay, we'll let you choose that maybe we can get away with pre-transcoding just this subset.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. This is really quite different from the other two interviews I mentioned earlier with Wistia and Netflix, where they definitely have a lot more flexibility when it comes to transcoding and caching as much of the content as possible. And this you guys have a totally different set of challenges that you have to meet. So
it's unique. Yeah. We're occasionally jealous of some of Netflix's use cases, I'll say, but it's all right. It's what makes it fun.
Have you been able to read some of their content and that's been helpful to you?
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I love they have a great example of an engineering blog, and I love that they've been kind of open about challenges and how they've attacked them.
Mm-hmm. I hope I can get some more of their people on here on the show. There's so many different, from server optimization to all these different things. It's super interesting. Another interesting thing with Plex is the metadata that I believe you pre-populate, right? How do you find that?
Yeah. So thing for us, we basically, the interesting thing about metadata is that there are tons of sources, and we made a decision early on that we don't really want to become our own source of metadata. We don't want to manage those huge databases of all of the media ever created. But at the same time, we kind of need to be an intelligent layer that allows you to access those. So what we basically do is work with as many of them as have good data. So taking music as an example, I guess, Gracenote has a great library. Last.fm has some good information. Discogs does. MusicBrainz does. We kind of sit on top of that so that when Plex Media Server is scanning content, it will look at it, try to find a match, and then ask our metadata servers and from all of those things. So
hold on, sorry, you cut out just for a second.
I think I missed.
All right, you're back now. Sorry about that.
So basically, we can sit on top of all of those and pick and choose kind of the best features from all of those. Okay. So without any, I don't even have a good example off the top of my head, but just hypothetically for the music case, somebody might have really good options and somebody else might have really high quality album artwork.
Yeah.
So rather than just choosing and saying, all right, we're going to do everything based on this one source, we can kind of have, we call them agents. We can have an agent that runs against each of those, and then we call them combiners that kind of looks at the results from each of those and then says, all right, I'm going to take the summary from here and the artwork from here, and then present that to clients.
Now, are you saying this is automatic, or is this an actual human being that goes through and checks them?
Automatic. So we've written those agents ourselves and kind of made some default ordering decisions based on general quality that we've seen. So
like I said, can you tell?
Well, so in the album description example, you could you look at a few albums from each, and it becomes obvious that one of them is kind of user submitted and poorly written, and another one access to some database of kind of, I don't know, official reviews or.
Interesting. And then do you pull that in and store it on your machines or servers instead of having to rely on somebody else?
Yeah. So we kind of have that distilled version, and then anytime we need to, we'll fetch kind of the original source to either to refresh what we cached or just to grab something if we didn't find it in our cache.
Awesome. So I think that concludes most of the questions I had for you regarding how Plex works. Is there anything else that you think we should cover or that I missed?
I don't think so.
Some other challenges or other things you're working on or anything like that? No.
Probably not.
I got it all.
Yeah. There's always another challenge, but I think we got the big ones.
Great. So now we can learn a little bit more about you then. What kind of career advice would you have if somebody was interested in working on this kind of application or working in the cloud or anything like that?
Yeah, I give different career advice to different people, I think, based on the context. But
that's probably a good thing.
I think depending on the cloud thing you're interested in, we've actually been kind of unreasonably fortunate in this regard, but we have had a ton of people just kind of find ways to work with us and pitch in, who then ended up getting hired full time, which I don't know if that works at a very high percentage of companies, but it's been an interesting lesson that, if something interests you, just go work on it, because there's kind of two outcomes. One is you were interested in it anyway, so you kind of had fun learning about it, end of story. Or you had fun and caught the attention of somebody and turned it into a full-time paying gig, which is awesome. There's kind of no huge downside in that regard. Right. The other advice I think is just I don't know, you can't be afraid to put yourself out there, which is the hard part, but exceedingly true. And then the one piece of advice that I probably do give to everybody is because it was from my own life, is to not be afraid to kind of use people learn about opportunities. I think when I was first getting a job out of college, had a degree in computer science, and I really wanted to just, get a job the hard way, like submit a resume on some website and have them pluck it out of the pile and be amazed and then offer you a job, which it turns out is incredibly difficult. Ended up taking a job through someone I knew. And once you get in, then you have this opportunity to actually do good work, learn, and kind of prove yourself. Every job I've had since then has somehow been traced back to, demonstrated accomplishments. So it's like getting that first job that can be really hard. There are 1,000 additional ways to get a second job just by going into the first one and, working hard, learning, and proving yourself.
That's really interesting. The whole time we were talking about this, I kept thinking of what just happened to me personally, where, I was still in college. I just graduated actually last month, and I've been doing this show for about a year now, and the way that I met Anthony at Linux Academy, Anthony's the founder of it, is through the show. I reached out to them and I said, hey, I really like what you're doing. I've got some sponsorships slots open. Would you be interested? and that's how I got the conversation started. I didn't even know him at all or anybody on that team before then, but we just kept working together, and we both really liked what we were respectively doing, and that's how you build relationships. And yeah, they went ahead and offered me a job. So I back you up on what you said 100%, because it just happened to me. So it's not just, you didn't just come up with that on your own and saying some or whatever you want. It actually works. It's true. So
yeah,
good note to end on. I really appreciate your time, Skylar. Thanks for sharing with us, and for taking the time to do this. I know you guys are pretty busy, so thanks a lot.
Yeah.
And I wish you guys the best of luck in 2016. You got
Definitely.
this. Now, if people want to reach out to you or to anyone at Plex, how do you recommend they do that?
The Plex.tv is the website to kind of get any general information. My email, I'll just say, is really guessable, if you know my name and that. And then we've got forums that are kind of a good place to get information about the product, any problems. That's kind of the number one place, is we have developers and community members in those forums helping people out.
Are you on Twitter or social media or anything like that?
Technically, I have a Twitter account, but no, that would be a terrible way to get a hold of me.
Okay.
I take a lot of abuse for kind of being an anti-technology and social networking person on the team. So,
well, anyway, if somebody really wants to get in touch with you, I'm sure they'll figure it out. I figured it out somehow, so they can do it. I know it's possible. Yes. All right. Well, thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, or if you want to thank Skylar for his time, please leave a comment below the video or reach out. Well, I guess don't reach out to him on Twitter, but you can reach out to me at scaleyourcode.com or at scaleyourcode or on scaleyourcode.com/contact. If you're listening through iTunes, I really appreciate a rating. It really helps reach a broader audience. And if you don't think it deserves 5 stars, I would love to talk to you and know why and how I could improve the show. So please reach out to me either at scaleyourcode or scaleyourcode.com/contact. Don't forget to check out Linux Academy for a discount at scaleyourcode.com/Linux Academy. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful 2016. See you next time.